So this is the yarn I'm going to be using. Its recommended hook size and needle size is 6mm, and with this needle size, every 13 stitches is 10 centimeters. Every 18 rows is 10 centimeters. So that's something that can be useful when you're deciding how many stitches or how many rows you want to do. But I usually like to size up, so I'm going to be using 7mm needles. So if, like me, you're using a different size needles than what your yarn calls for, you want to make a little swatch so you can see your gauge, at least to figure out how many stitches for every 10 centimeters. So the gauge with 6mm is 13 stitches for 10 centimeters, but I'm using a bigger hook. If you want to finish your swatch and block it before you measure it, you can do that as well. But I'm just going to measure it like this. So it only takes me 10 to 11 stitches to reach 10 centimeters. So we're going to begin from the back panel because it's the easiest. You need to decide how wide you want your cardigan to be. This is a very important step because once you get your length, you can't really change it. So for me, I want to make my panel about 60 centimeters, maybe 70, I'll have to see. So I need 11 stitches for 10 centimeters. That means I would need 66 stitches for 60 centimeters. So I'm going to leave a long tail. I'm going to make a slip knot like this. I'm going to pull this yarn through the loop. And then with the short tail facing me, insert my needle. And the cast on method I'm going to be using is long tail cast on. And like I said before, if you don't know how to do this cast on, at the top right corner, I've linked videos on how to do that. Here, I'm just going to show you once how to do it in slow motion. So that was 10. I'm going to continue casting on like this until I have 66 loops on my needle. So this is supposed to be 60 centimeters, but I actually want it to be a bit wider. So I'm going to cast on 77 stitches, so just 11 more. Okay, so now that I've got 77 stitches, this is gonna be the width of the back panel, which is also the width of the cardigan. So we're gonna be working with this working yarn, so make sure you get the tail out of your way. So this is gonna be the bottom of the back panel. We're going to knit every stitch of this row. And like I said before, if you don't know how to knit, I've got tutorials to help you, but I'm not going to go into details here. So for this first row, I'm just going to knit every stitch. I'll see you at the end of the row. finishing my last stitch. And then I'm just going to turn my work and begin my next row. The beginning rows are super easy. For this row too, we're going to knit every stitch. So just like what you did before, you're going to knit every single stitch of this row. Okay, so this is the end of row 2. Row 3 to 5, we're going to do the same thing, just knit every stitch for every row. So this is the end of row 5. After 5 rows, you should have something like this. This is going to be the wrong side, and this is going to be the right side of the sweater. So the first 5 rows are all knit rows. From row 6, we're going to do 2-row repeat. The first row is going to be a knit row, so that means you're going to knit every single stitch of that row. And for the repeat row 2, we're going to purl every stitch. So you need to get your needle behind your yarn and just purl this stitch. I've linked a video on how to do the purl stitch. So if you don't know how to purl a stitch, you can learn it in that video. But for this second repeat row, I'm just going to purl every stitch. So when you finish this purl row, you're just going to repeat those 2 rows again. So knit 1 row, purl 1 row. So for the next row, I'm going to knit every stitch, and the row after this, purl every stitch. If you forgot whether you should knit or purl the next row, you can have a look at the pattern here. If it looks like the typical knit look, then you should knit this row. If it looks like the typical wrong side of a garment, when this is facing me, I should purl this row. So that's how you can tell if you should knit or purl the next row. So I'm going to continue working like that and meet you back here when I have enough rows for this back panel. So this is what I've done with just 1 ball of yarn. I didn't like how we switched the color after just a few rows, so I changed the color. I started from the darkest brown. So I did 87 rows starting from the very bottom, and it measures about 50 centimeters. So because I don't want to add a second ball of yarn, I'm just gonna stop here. But if you want your cardigan to be longer, you just work more rows. So when your panel is long enough, we're going to cast off the stitches. Make sure you have enough length left for 1 row. And also make sure your next row is a knit row because we're going to cast off the stitches from the knit side. So we're going to begin with knitting the first 2 stitches separately. So knit 1, 2. So to cast off the first stitch, I'm just going to pull it over the second one. So the first stitch is cast off. To cast off this stitch, I need to knit the next stitch. cast off the stitch before it. Make sure you don't do this part too tight. Knit the next stitch, cast off the stitch before it. I'm gonna wiggle it so it's not too tight. So continue doing this, I'll see you at the end of the row. So when you have one stitch left on your needle, you just pull this end through to fasten off. And that is the back panel. So the next part, you can also customize it, which is the two front panels. So one front panel is going to go like this, and the other one's going to go like this. We're going to leave some gap at the center for the neck hole. And to work out how many stitches you need for your front panel, you can first mark out the neck hole. So for the back panel, I have 77 stitches, and since it's an odd number, I'm gonna need to mark out an odd number at the center as well. So I marked out the center 19 stitches, and that measures about 6 inches. So I've got 77 stitches minus 19. It gives me 58 stitches, but that's for both panels, so I need to divide it by 2, and that gives me 29. So that means each of my front panels is going to have 29 stitches. So I'm going to start my front panels in the same way as the back panel. The only difference between the back panel and the front panels is the stitch number that you cast on. So for each of the front panel, I'm going to cast on 29 stitches. So this is the back panel, and I'm working on a front panel right now. I want to show you how you can make the colors match. So I'm working on this color and I want the row count to match. I have 19 rows here. To count your rows, you just count each V. So 1, so that's 1 row, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if you want to work 19 rows to match this one, you're going to work 18 rows. This one will be number 19, and that's how you make the row count match. And then let me show you how you can change color. So what I do is I cut this color, leave a little tail, and then I get the other color. Depends on what your next row is. If it's a knit row, then you would knit that row. But my next row is purl. So because my next row is purl, my yarn needs to be at the front. Like this. So I'm just holding it with my thumb. And then I go ahead and purl this stitch. So I'm going to purl 2 more stitches before I tighten the ends. I can tie these 2 ends together. And that is it. That's how you change color between rows. And for the last color you're going to cast off, do the same. Say if you need 17 rows here, this is row 17. You do the same thing here, work 16 rows, and this row on your needle is row 17. And then you can do your cast off. For the back panel, 2 front panels, we're always going to cast off on the knit side. If you're finding yourself casting off on the purl side, then your row count is wrong. For one of the front panels, when you fasten off, leave a tail that's about 1.5 meters, so we can sew the front panel with the back panel at the shoulder seam later. You just need to do this for one front panel. So I've got my back panel here, and two front panels. So this is the bottom. We're going to join the two front panels to the back panel at the shoulder seam. So I'm joining the right shoulder first. I've got a tail here, and it's on my needle. I'm going to flip them and then do it this way. So that's the front panel shoulder and back panel shoulder. So we're going to go to the back panel first. As you can see, we have columns of V's here. That's the first column, second column of V's, and third. We're going to go between the first and the second column. In this first row, the V at the very top. Between the first and the second column, and then to the other side, do the same thing. That's the first column of V, second, go between the first and the second one, here. Then go back to where your yarn is coming out of, which is here, and catch two loops, like this. Back to this side, do the same. Back to where it's coming out of. We're going to go in here and catch two loops from this side as well. And then we're just going to repeat it back in the same hole, two loops, back in the same hole, two loops. And after a few stitches, you're just going to gently pull it. The first stitch it's going to be a bit tight, so I'm going to adjust it a little bit, and then I can pull this tight. Continue doing this. Last one. And that's it. I'm going to go back to where this is coming out of again. So back to this panel, and then I will fasten this tail off on the wrong side, just through the seams here. Cut this yarn, and that's it. So we just did one seam. Then you're going to do the other shoulder in the exact same way. So this is the back panel, but I already remind you to leave a long tail because it's easier to use this tail, so you don't have to count your stitches. But if you use this one, you'd have to work out which stitch you need to start the seam from. So you just repeat the same step to finish the shoulder seam on this side. So once you're done with the shoulders, we're going to pick up stitches around the armhole so we can work the arms. So I left about 45 stitches here and 45 stitches on the back panel as well, and that's about 10 inches. So 10 inches on the edge of the front panel and 10 inches on the edge of the back panel. So I'm going to pick up my stitches around here. So we're going to do this from the right side of the cardigan, beginning from the stitch that I marked. These two should be in the same row, by the way. So beginning from this first one, first I'm going to find this edge column of the V. Remember before, we have the first column of V here. This is the second column. Whenever I insert my needle, I'm going to go between these two columns. So like this. Okay, so beginning from this stitch, this row, I'm going to insert my needle between the second column and the first column of V, which is here. You should have 2 loops on your needle like this. And then you grab your new color, create a loop like this and put it on your needle. Note the short end is at the back. So put it on your needle and pull it through like that. We can secure this end by holding it at the back for now. And then you see we have a bar here, and then the next space. Insert your needle in that space, and then just grab this yarn and pull it through like that. This is gonna be a bit tricky at the beginning, but for now you just take your time, and then into the next space and pull up one more loop, and then you skip the next one, going to the one after it, which is this one, and then you pull up a loop. Sometimes I use my right hand. I feel it could be easier like this. So it's a little bit like you're knitting. Okay, and then go to the next space. And grab a loop. Next again, this one. This is number 3. So you do 3 loops like that and skip one. 3 loops like that and then skip the next space. Go into the one after that. 1, second loop, third loop, skip, and then go in the one after that. Continue doing this. At the shoulder seam, really I'm just trying not to leave any gap. That's my second loop. Looking for the third one. On this side, make sure you still go between the first and the second column of V's, which is this line. That's 1, 2, 3. I'm supposed to skip this one. Well, just to avoid any gap, I'm gonna pick up a loop from this as well. Okay, maybe I'll skip the next one, and from this one, pick up a loop, and then continue from here. So skip 1, 1, 2, 3. This happens to be the last stitch. So now, across this edge, I have 64 stitches in total. Your stitch number might be a bit different, that's okay. You can double check here one more time that you have enough stitches for the sleeve. Because for the front panel, I have almost 30 stitches. And the sleeve's gonna have 64 stitches, so this is basically gonna be half of the sleeve. And it's gonna fit me. And next, we're going to work the stitches in the round. So we're working in this direction. For round 2, we're going to continue from the next stitch to round and round like this. So the length of my needle is just perfect, but I can always change to a shorter one. If your cable is really long and you don't have enough stitches to go around the cable, so your last and the first stitch wouldn't meet at the tip here, you can still work in the round. You need to look up something called magic loop. It allows you to work in the round with a long cable. So I'm going to put a stitch marker here. This is to mark the beginning or the end of the round. And then from here, we're just gonna work in the round. We're going to knit every stitch, starting from this one. And after the first stitch, you're going to pull your yarn really tight to make sure there's not going to be a big gap under the arm. Go ahead and knit your next stitch. So you just keep knitting like this round and round. And each time you get to the beginning of the round, you're going to slip the stitch marker to the other needle and then continue knitting, beginning a new round. So I first did 18 rows of this color. I'm counting this one on the needle as well, but if I count the loops, I should have 17 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you don't need to change color, you can do 6 more rows, but I'm going to change color here and then do 6 rows in that color. So that's the last stitch. Slip the stitch marker. I'm going to change color in the next stitch. Grab the next color, go ahead and do that stitch. So I'm at the end of row 6. And slip the marker. So when you finish 6 rows, you should have 5 loops in this color. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not including the one on the needle, because we're going to do some decrease. For a decrease row, we're going to knit the first stitch. And then knit the next 2 stitches together. So just put them together and knit them as one stitch. And then I'm going to knit every single stitch of this round until I have 3 stitches left, 3 loops left at the end of the round. So now I've got 3 loops at the end of the row. I'm going to make a decrease in the next 2 stitches again. But this time, instead of a knit 2 together like we did here, I'm going to do an SSK. If we have a look here, you can see that decrease is a knit 2 together, and that one is an SSK. And as you can see, they look symmetrical. So if you do an SSK here, it's gonna look better, but if you do a knit 2 together, like this, it will still work. So to do an SSK, we're going to slip the next stitch as if to knit, slip the next stitch knitwise again, and then I'm going to insert my left needle through the front loops of those 2 stitches and knit them through the back loop like so. So we just did a decrease at the end of the row as well. And then go ahead and knit this last stitch and then slip the marker, and from the next round I'm going to just knit every stitch, no decrease. So I'm going to knit another 5 rounds like this. So it'll look like this. See, we have a decrease here. This is the beginning of the row. That's the end of the row, but we're just gonna look at the beginning here. So that's the decrease row. After that row, we're going to do 5 regular rows without any decrease. So we would have 5 loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we do a decrease row again. So I'm going to continue working in rounds again until I have 5 loops in a column after this decrease row again. So when you finish a row and you have 5 loops after this decrease row, so that's the decrease, I have 5 loops here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 loops here. That means the next row is going to be a decrease row again. So slip the marker, knit the first stitch, and then knit the next 2 stitches together, and then knit every single stitch until you have 3 loops left, like this, 3 loops left. Slip the first stitch knitwise, slip the second stitch knitwise, go back through the front loops, then knit them together, then knit the last stitch to complete this decrease row. And then we're just going to knit in the round again until we have 5 loops in the column, just like these ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then decrease, decrease. So with this color, I'm going to work decrease 3 times. So 5 regular rows, 1 decrease, 5 regular rows, 1 decrease, then 5 regular rows, 1 decrease again. But if you're working in different colors like me, the 3rd time you do that decrease, you're going to change color and then use that new color to do that last decrease row. So like this. After the decrease, I have 5 loops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I would change color and then do a decrease row. And then this color section is complete. So let me just quickly walk you through this again in case I wasn't clear before. So after we change color here, we continue working in rounds until we have 5 loops in this color, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we do a decrease row here. Continue working in rounds again till we have 5 loops again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then decrease again. And then 5 more regular rounds. Change to the next color and then do the last decrease round of this color. And then begin working in the next color until we have 5 rounds, 5 loops in this color again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then decrease, repeat what we did here. So the first color, no decrease, second color, 3 decrease rounds, 1, 2, 3, and then third color 3 decrease rounds, fourth color 3 decrease rounds. And then when we get to the fifth color, I'm only gonna do 5 regular rounds, 1 decrease round, and then 5 regular rounds again. And then the pattern after that will be different, but everything before that followed a pattern. So I'm just going to continue doing this, and I'll see you around here after those 5 regular rounds. So this is the last color. We're close to finishing the sleeve. In this color, I worked 5 regular rows, 1 row decrease, and then 5 regular rows again. Our pattern stops here. Then we're going to do 2 rows of decrease before the cuff. But we're going to do this differently. I'm going to slip the marker. This is the beginning of the row. I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches separately. And then knit the next 2 stitches together. And this would be the pattern for this row. So knit the next 2 stitches and then do a knit 2 together. Continue repeating this and finish this row. So with my stitch number, I happened to finish this pattern one last time before I finish this row. Say if you have 3 stitches left, you would just knit those 3 stitches separately. Slipped marker. The next row we're going to decrease again. The pattern for the next row is knit the first stitch, and then knit 2 together. And then just repeat that again. Knit 1, and then knit 2 together. Repeat this pattern for the whole round. So I'm going to do the pattern one last time. Knit 1, and then knit 2 together. Slip the marker. And then we finished the sleeve. And we're going to start the cuff. The pattern for the cuff is 1 row of purl stitches and then 1 row of knit stitches. So this is the first row. Bring my yarn to the front and then just purl every single stitch. When you're purling the first stitch on this side using the magic loop, make sure your yarn stay at the bottom, and then you go in the first stitch like this, and then grab your yarn and purl this stitch. Then you should have 1 loop on your right needle. If you have 2 loops, then you've made a mistake. So After one row of purl, bring your yarn to the front, slip the marker, because the next row is going to be a knit row. Then you just go ahead and knit every stitch of this row. So I finished the last stitch. Then you're just going to repeat those 2 rows to work the cuff. So purl one row and then knit one row. The next row is purl, bring yarn to the front, slip marker, and begin working purl stitches. So keep working like this until you reach your desired cuff length. So I just finished a purl row and I've got 5 rows of bumps here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm gonna stop here and cast off the stitches. The next row is a knit row, so bring the yarn to the back, slip marker, knit the first 2 stitches and cast off the first stitch. And then like before, you're going to knit 1 stitch and cast off the stitch before it and just repeat this. So when you have the last loop, leave some tail so we can weave it in. We're just going to mimic the top 2 loops here. So I'm going to go through the very first top 2 loops. And then back to where this yarn is coming out of. And then just hide your yarn on the wrong side. And then you're going to cut this tail to complete the cuff. So when you finish your sleeve, the next part is sewing the side seam at the underarm. For this seam, you can use any color because it won't show. So the length of the yarn that you're going to use to sew up the seam has to be at least a little bit more than this length. I'm going to use this tail here since it's already connected, but it's not long enough, so I'll have to join the yarn later. So the first 5 rows is this pattern, the garter stitch. I'm gonna first go to the corner here just to connect these 2 panels together. And then I'll go to the corner of this panel as well. And then you can see we have these bumps here. We have an upper bump and then a lower bump. We're going to go to the very edge of the bump. So this one is an upper bump. I'm gonna go upward through it. And then go to the other side. We've got the first row of bumps here. On this side, we should have a lower bump, but it's difficult, so I'm just gonna go through this upper one. And then go back to the left side, go through the bump at the very edge. Back to the right side, go through the edge bump. Left side, edge bump, and then right side edge bump. So that's for the garter stitch. For this pattern, stockinette stitch, it's a bit easier. So remember we have columns of beads here. When we pick up stitches along this edge, we go between the first and second column. And here we're still gonna go between them. So I'm gonna go between the first and the second column, and then you can grab a bar like this. And then you would go through that. And on this side as well. First column, second column. Go between them and grab a bar. And then go back to where this yarn is coming out of. Grab a bar to the right side, back to where the yarn is coming out of, and grab a bar. And then pull. Make sure your rows line up. So you're just gonna continue doing this to join the two edges. I'll see you at the underarm. So you do this all the way to this very last stitch under the arm. And then just go back in where this yarn is coming out of to the wrong side, and that's it. And then you fasten it off on the wrong side. The very last thing to do is the border at the front. It's super easy. Remember how we picked up stitches between the first and the second column? So you're going to do that from the very bottom, and you're going to pick up a loop from the first 3 spaces and then skip 1, 3 loops, and then skip 1. Just like how we picked up the stitches for the sleeve. So now you should know how to do this part. For this one, for this garter stitch, we have 5 rows here, so you would pick up 4 loops. And every time you insert your hook, you should have 2 loops on your needle. So that's the first row. Second row. Third row. Skip the next one, go into the one after that. So 3 loops out of 4 rows. This is the first shoulder seam. 1, 2, I'm gonna pick up 1 more. And then for the back panel, we have something different. For this edge, every time we go to pick up a loop, we're going to go to the center of the V here. So that is the first one. Gonna go in here and pick up a stitch. For this side, we're going to pick up loop from every single stitch. first column of V, second one, go in the center. So for this edge, we're not skipping any stitches. And then after that, you're going to do the same for this edge all the way to the bottom. And then flip your work, knit every single stitch all the way to the other end, and then flip again, knit every single stitch. So you're just going to continue knitting every stitch back and forth along this front border here, and theoretically you can work as many rows as you want.